You'll never amount to anything more than a pathetic little cleaning lady scrubbing toilets for pennies, Bela, so quit fantasizing that someone like Ronald Blackwood would ever see you as anything but the worthless charity case you are. The venomous words sliced through Bella Santos like a rusty blade, each syllable designed to shred what little hope she'd been clinging to. Her stepfather's tobacco-stained teeth gleamed in a cruel smile as he waved a thick legal document like a matador taunting a bull, the papers crackling ominously in the suffocating air of their cockroach-infested kitchen. The smell of rancid grease from the broken stove mixed with the acrid stench of her stepfather's cheap cologne, creating a nauseating cocktail that made Bella's empty stomach churn. She clutched the stack of red-stamped bills against her chest like armor, feeling the sharp edges cut into her palms. 3 months of playing house with Manhattan's most notorious bastard, he continued, his voice dripping with malicious glee. Smile pretty, bat those doe eyes, and pretend you're not completely repulsed by his touch. Do that, and your precious mama gets to keep breathing in something other than a cardboard box under the Manhattan Bridge. Bella's dark eyes blazed with a fury that could have melted steel. You're pimping me out. I'm giving you the opportunity of several lifetimes. Her stepfather's laugh was like broken glass scraping against concrete. Ronald Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood fortune, owner of half the real estate in New York, and apparently desperate enough to pay top dollar for a fake wife. You should be kissing my feet in gratitude instead of standing there looking like I just asked you to murder someone. The apartment's front door suddenly exploded open with such force that the hinges screamed in protest. Bella's heart slammed against her ribs as Ronald Blackwood himself filled the doorway like an avenging angel dressed in Armani. 6 feet 4 inches of lethal elegance, he moved with the predatory grace of a panther stalking prey. His obsidian black hair was perfectly styled despite the October wind, and his storm-gray eyes held all the warmth of Arctic winter. The charcoal suit he wore probably cost more than most people's cars, and every inch of him screamed power, control, and danger. Miss Santos. His voice was bourbon and smoke, with an underlying edge that suggested he could destroy lives with a whispered word. I assume you've had time to consider my proposition? Bella lifted her chin in defiance, even as her knees threatened to buckle under the intensity of his stare. I don't recall being asked to consider anything, Mr. Blackwood. Propositions usually involve actual choice. A smile played at the corner of his mouth. Not warm or friendly, but the kind of smile a shark might wear before tearing apart its prey. Your stepfather led me to believe you were amenable to our arrangement. My stepfather believes a lot of things, Bella shot back, her voice gaining strength even as her pulse hammered like a hummingbird's wings. Like that, I'm desperate enough to sell myself to the highest bidder. Ronald's eyebrows lifted almost imperceptibly. In his world, people groveled, begged, and threw themselves at his feet for even a fraction of what he was offering this slip of a girl. Yet here she stood in her thrift store jeans and faded sweater, challenging him as if she held all the cards instead of being completely at his mercy. Interesting, he murmured, stepping into the cramped space with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. And what would it take to make you amenable? The way he said the word made heat crawl up Bella's neck, and she hated herself for the traitorous flutter in her stomach. An explanation would be nice. Men like you don't rescue damsels in distress without expecting a very specific return on investment. Men like me? His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Rich, powerful, ruthless. Bella counted off on her fingers, her Spanish accent thickening with emotion. The kind of man who buys people like their furniture and expects them to be grateful for the privilege. Ronald studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable. Most women either threw themselves at him shamelessly or cowered in fear of his reputation. This one was doing neither, and for reasons he couldn't quite understand, that intrigued him more than it should have. You're right, he said finally. I am all of those things. I'm also the only thing standing between your mother and a very unpleasant conversation with some very unforgiving creditors. The reminder hit Bela like a physical blow. Her mother's gentle face flashed through her mind, pale and drawn from months of chemotherapy, but still managing to smile whenever Bella walked into that sterile hospital room. The woman who had sacrificed everything to raise a daughter who wasn't even her biological child, who worked 3 jobs to put food on the table, who never once complained about the burden Bella's stepfather had become. "What exactly do you want from me?" Bella asked quietly. Ronald gestured toward the leather briefcase his assistant had placed on the rickety table. 3 months as my wife. Public appearances, social functions, enough convincing performances to satisfy my board of directors that I've achieved the stability they're demanding. And in return, your mother's medical debt disappears. This apartment gets paid for 2 years. You receive a settlement generous enough to ensure you never have to scrub another toilet or serve another plate of greasy eggs to truckers who think your uniform gives them the right to grab your ass. Bella flinched at his crude accuracy. He'd clearly done his homework, knew exactly which pressure points to apply. "How do you know about—" "I know everything about you, Bella Santos. 26 years old, dropped out of college to care for your sick mother, currently working 3 jobs to stay barely afloat. Your stepfather gambled away your mother's life insurance money and borrowed against this apartment to cover his losses. You're drowning, and I'm offering you a life preserver." The clinical way he recited her failures made Bella's cheeks burn with humiliation. "You make it sound so simple." "Because it is simple." Ronald moved closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, something dark and masculine that made her think of midnight and silk sheets. "I need a wife to secure my inheritance. You need money to save your mother. We both get what we want." "What about what I want for myself?" The question seemed to surprise him. "What do you want?" For a wild moment, Bella almost laughed. When was the last time anyone had asked her that? When was the last time her own desires had mattered to anyone, including herself? "I want to finish my degree," she said suddenly. "Art history. I want to work in a museum, surrounded by beautiful things that tell stories about people who lived and loved and dreamed centuries ago. I want to matter." Something flickered across Ronald's face, too quick to identify, but it looked almost like recognition. "Consider this your scholarship program. Funded by selling my dignity to a man who probably has women delivered to his penthouse like pizza." This time, Ronald's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't pay for sex, Miss Santos. If I wanted a whore, I could afford much better than you." The insult hit its mark, but instead of crumbling, Bella straightened her spine and met his gaze head-on. "Then what do you want from me that you can't buy from someone more suitable?" "Authenticity," he said simply. "My usual social circle consists of women who would sell their grandmother's jewelry for a chance to be seen on my arm. I need someone real, someone who won't fall in love with my bank account and start planning our actual future together. Someone safe," Bella translated. "Someone temporary." The word hung between them, like a challenge. Bella looked at the contract, then at her stepfather's greedy face, then at the stack of bills that represented her mother's hope for survival. "I have conditions," she said finally. Ronald's eyebrow arched. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate. I am, if you want this charade to be believable." Bella's voice grew stronger with each word. "First condition, separate bedrooms. This marriage is strictly business." "Agreed." "Second, I finish my degree. You said this was a scholarship program? Then I want access to Columbia's art history graduate program." Ronald nodded slowly. "Acceptable." "Third," Bella took a deep breath. "When this is over, when the 3 months are up, you disappear from my life completely. No lingering obligations, no check-ins, no guilt trips about how much you've done for me. Clean break." For the first time since entering her pathetic excuse for a home, Ronald looked genuinely surprised. Most people would be begging to extend the arrangement. "I'm not most people." "No," he murmured, his gray eyes studying her with new interest. "You're definitely not." Bella reached for the pen with trembling fingers, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. 3 months. She could endure anything for 3 months if it meant her mother would live to see Christmas. "One more thing," Ronald said softly, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Try to look happy at the wedding, Mrs. Blackwood. The photographers will be watching." The title hit her like a physical blow, making the reality of what she was about to do crash over her in waves. In a few days, she would be married to this dangerous, beautiful stranger who looked at her like she was simultaneously fascinating and completely disposable. Bella Santos, the girl who had dreamed of fairy tale romance and true love, was about to become a billionaire's bought and paid for wife. She signed her name with quick, decisive strokes, sealing her fate in black ink. "Welcome to the family," Ronald said with a smile that promised either salvation or damnation. Possibly both. "If you think I'm going to walk down that aisle looking like a discount store Cinderella, while half of Manhattan's elite whisper about how the great Ronald Blackwood scraped me off the bottom of his shoe, you're even more delusional than I thought." Bella stood in the middle of Bergdorf Goodman's private bridal suite, arms crossed defiantly, glaring at the small army of stylists, seamstresses, and wedding planners who had descended upon her like perfectly manicured vultures. The wedding dress they'd selected, a confection of silk and crystals that cost more than her mother's annual medication, hung mockingly on its golden hanger, practically radiating smugness. Ronald lounged in a velvet armchair like a bored emperor watching gladiators fight for his amusement, his long fingers steepled as he observed the standoff, with what might have been entertainment. "The dress is Vera Wang. Most women would kill for the opportunity to wear it." "Most women haven't been purchased like a piece of furniture and told to smile pretty while doing it." Bella's Spanish accent thickened with fury, turning her words into weapons. "I may have signed your contract, but nowhere in those 37 pages did it say I had to dress up like your perfect little doll." The lead stylist, a skeletal woman named Vivian, who looked like she survived exclusively on air and judgment, sniffed disdainfully. "Perhaps something from the clearance rack would be more appropriate for your background?" The words hit their mark with surgical precision. Bella felt heat crawl up her neck, but before she could respond, Ronald's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Vivian." His tone was deceptively soft, but there was something underneath it that made the stylist's face go pale. "I believe I specifically requested your expertise in making my fiancée look stunning, not in providing commentary on her origins. Perhaps I should find someone more capable?" The threat was wrapped in velvet, but it was a threat nonetheless. Vivian practically prostrated herself. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood, I misspoke. Miss Santos has such unique beauty. We simply want to enhance her natural elegance." Bella stared at Ronald in shock. She'd expected him to side with his people, to put her in her place with the same casual cruelty he'd shown at their first meeting. Instead, he defended her with the kind of quiet menace that suggested careers could end with a single phone call. "Why?" she asked quietly. Ronald stood with fluid grace, moving toward her with the predatory elegance that seemed to be his trademark. "Because you're mine now, Bella, and I protect what's mine." The possessive way he said her name sent an unwelcome thrill down her spine. She hated that her body responded to his proximity, hated the way her pulse quickened when he invaded her personal space like he had every right to be there. "I'm not yours," she whispered. "I'm your employee. For the next 3 months, there's no difference." His gray eyes held hers captive. "Now, are you going to try on the dress, or shall I have them bring something more to your liking?" Bella glanced around the suite, taking in the sea of expectant faces. These people lived in Ronald's world, breathed his air, survived on his approval. To them, she was an interloper, a pretender who didn't belong in their rarefied atmosphere. But she'd be damned if she'd let them see her break. "Fine," she said with false bravado. "But I want to see the other options first. If I'm going to be your trophy wife, I at least want to choose my own display case." Ronald's smile was sharp and approving. "Bring everything." The next 2 hours were a blur of silk, satin, and subtle warfare. Bella tried on dress after dress while the stylists offered backhanded compliments and thinly veiled insults about her figure, her posture, her complexion. Through it all, Ronald watched with the intensity of a hawk, his comments becoming progressively more cutting toward his staff as their treatment of Bella became more obvious. This one, Bella finally stood before the mirror in a gown that made her breath catch. It was simpler than the others, ivory silk that hugged her curves without screaming for attention, with delicate beading that caught the light like captured stars. She looked beautiful. Not like someone playing dress-up, but like herself, only elevated. "Exquisite," Ronald murmured, and something in his voice made her look at him through the mirror. For just a moment, his carefully controlled mask slipped, and she saw something raw and hungry in his eyes before he shuttered it away. "It's perfect," Vivian gushed, suddenly all enthusiasm now that Ronald had voiced his approval. "You look absolutely radiant, Miss Santos." Bella barely heard her. She was still caught in the web of Ronald's gaze, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with the dress's fitted bodice. "The ceremony is tomorrow," Ronald said, his business voice firmly back in place. "Small gathering, just immediate family and key board members. Nothing elaborate." "Now small for people like you probably means 50 people, Bella muttered, stepping down from the platform with as much dignity as she could manage while wearing a dress that cost more than most people's cars. 73, actually." Ronald's smile was wickedly amused. "Including your mother, who will be released from the hospital this afternoon specifically to attend." Bella's world tilted. "My mother? But she's not strong enough. I've arranged for a private medical team to accompany her. She'll be comfortable." Ronald's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I thought you might want her there." The gesture was so unexpected, so thoughtful, that it completely derailed Bella's carefully maintained anger. "Why would you do that?" "Because despite what you think of me, I'm not completely heartless." Ronald moved closer, his voice dropping to that intimate whisper that made her skin prickle with awareness. "And because I remember what it's like to need your mother's approval, even when you're terrified of disappointing her." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Bella saw a flash of something vulnerable in his eyes, a crack in the armor that revealed the man beneath the billionaire facade. "Thank you," she said softly. Ronald nodded curtly and turned away, but not before she caught the slight flush on his cheekbones. "The car will pick you up at 9 tomorrow morning. Don't be late." As he strode toward the exit with his usual commanding presence, Bella called after him. "Ronald?" He paused without turning around. "What happens after tomorrow? I mean, day to day. Where do I live? What do I do? How does this whole fake marriage thing actually work?" Ronald looked back over his shoulder, and his smile was equal parts promise and threat. "You'll live in my penthouse. You'll attend social functions as my wife. You'll smile, look beautiful, and convince everyone that you're madly in love with me. And what will you do? Try very hard not to forget that this is all pretend." The words hit her like a physical blow, loaded with implications that made her heart race and her cheeks burn. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and the echo of a promise that sounded more like a warning. Vivian cleared her throat delicately. "Shall we discuss your going-away outfit, Mrs. Blackwood?" The title made Bella's stomach flip. Tomorrow, she would walk down an aisle toward a man who looked at her like she was simultaneously the answer to his prayers and the source of his destruction. She would promise to love, honor, and cherish someone who had bought her loyalty like a commodity. And the most terrifying part wasn't that it was all fake. It was that somewhere between his defense of her dignity and his thoughtfulness toward her mother, she was starting to worry it might become real. "Mrs. Blackwood," she repeated quietly, testing the weight of the name on her tongue. It fit better than she'd expected. And that scared her more than anything Ronald Blackwood had done so far. "Darling, you simply must tell us where Ronald found you." We're all absolutely dying to know which charity auction he attended to acquire such an exotic little wife. The words dripped from Victoria Ashford's perfectly glossed lips like poisoned honey, each syllable designed to strip away another layer of Bela's confidence. The charity gala was supposed to be their first public appearance as a married couple, and barely an hour in, Bella already felt like a gazelle surrounded by a pack of perfectly coiffed wolves. She stood in the middle of Ronald's penthouse living room, a monument to masculine wealth with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, wearing a midnight blue evening gown that had cost more than her old apartment's annual rent. Despite the designer armor, she felt completely exposed under the scrutiny of Manhattan's social elite. "Actually," Bella replied with a smile sharp enough to cut glass, "he found me at work. You know, that thing some people do to earn money instead of inheriting it?" Victoria's laugh was like wind chimes in a hurricane, beautiful and completely artificial. How refreshingly authentic. Ronald always did have such interesting taste in his acquisitions. The word acquisitions hit its mark perfectly. Bella felt heat crawl up her neck, but before she could respond, a familiar warmth pressed against her back as Ronald's arm slid around her waist with possessive grace. "Victoria." His voice was silk, wrapped around steel. "I see you've met my wife. Bella, darling. Victoria here was just telling me about her recent divorce settlement. Apparently Charles decided that 20 years of marriage wasn't worth half his assets after all." Victoria's smile faltered. "That's not exactly. Fascinating how these things work out," Ronald continued smoothly, his thumb tracing lazy circles on Bella's hip that made her pulse spike traitorously. "Some people marry for love, others for money. The trick is knowing which category you fall into before you sign the papers." The barb found its target. Victoria's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as several nearby guests turned to listen, sensing blood in the water. "Well, I suppose we all make our choices." "Indeed we do." Ronald's grip on Bella tightened almost imperceptibly. "If you'll excuse us, I'd like to introduce my wife to some people who actually matter." As he guided her away from Victoria's venomous circle, Bella marveled at the effortless way he dismantled the woman's attack. "Thank you," she murmured. "Don't thank me yet," Ronald replied quietly. "The real wolves haven't come out to play." As if summoned by his words, a distinguished older man with silver hair and predatory eyes approached them with the confidence of someone accustomed to owning everything he surveyed. "Ronald, my boy," the man's voice boomed across the space. "And this must be the mysterious bride we've all been hearing about." Bella felt Ronald tense beside her. "Bella, I'd like you to meet Harrison Montgomery, chairman of our board of directors. Harrison, my wife, Bella Blackwood." The name still felt foreign on her tongue, but hearing Ronald say it with such casual possession sent an unwelcome thrill through her system. Harrison's assessment was thorough and insulting, his eyes cataloging her like she was livestock at auction. "Enchanting," he said finally, "though I must admit your choice came as quite a surprise to all of us. We had rather expected someone more established in our social circles." "I prefer authenticity to pedigree," Ronald replied coldly. Of course. Harrison's smile never wavered. "Though one does wonder about the wisdom of such impulsive decisions. The board has expressed some concerns about stability, you understand." Bella felt like a specimen under a microscope, but she'd be damned if she'd let these people see her crumble. "I'm sorry," she said with false sweetness. "Are you questioning my husband's judgment? Because that seems like a rather dangerous position for an employee to take." The word employee hit like a slap. Harrison's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on an alarming shade of purple. "I hardly think—" "Exactly," Bella interrupted smoothly. "You hardly think. You assume, you judge, you whisper behind hands and make pronouncements about people you've never bothered to actually know. It must be exhausting, carrying around all that superiority while contributing so little actual value." The silence that followed was deafening. Ronald's grip on her waist had gone rigid, and for a terrifying moment, Bella wondered if she'd just destroyed his carefully laid plans with her inability to play the meek little wife. Then Ronald threw back his head and laughed, a rich, genuine sound that she'd never heard from him before. "Gentlemen," he announced to the rapidly gathering crowd, "I believe my wife just questioned the intellectual capacity of our board chairman. Harrison, would you care to respond? Or shall we all assume she's correct?" Harrison sputtered like a broken engine. "This is highly inappropriate." "Is it?" Ronald's voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that made smart people step backward. "Because it seems to me that questioning my wife's suitability in public is far more inappropriate than her defending herself against your poorly disguised insults." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. These people lived on gossip and social warfare, but they also understood power dynamics with the clarity of apex predators. Ronald Blackwood Angry was not a man anyone wanted to cross. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Harrison suggested weakly. "Perhaps you should remember who signs your paychecks," Ronald countered smoothly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I'd like to dance with my wife." Without waiting for a response, he swept Bela onto the makeshift dance floor that had been created in the center of his living room. The string quartet, because of course he had a string quartet, began playing something slow and romantic that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "You realize you just made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the city," Bela said as they swayed together, his hands burning through the silk of her dress. "Harrison Montgomery is a relic who's been coasting on his father's reputation for 30 years, Ronald replied dismissively. "He needed to be reminded of his place. And what about my place?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Where exactly do I fit in your world, Ronald?" He was quiet for so long that she wondered if he'd heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with something that sounded almost like uncertainty. "I'm still figuring that out." The honesty in his admission caught her off guard. She'd expected arrogance, possession, the cold calculation she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, she got vulnerability wrapped in expensive fabric and the most intoxicating cologne known to mankind. "This is harder than I thought it would be," she confessed quietly. "What is?" "Pretending to be something I'm not. Pretending that I belong here, that I'm worthy of wearing these clothes and living in this palace." She gestured around them at the opulent space that could house 3 families comfortably. "Pretending that I don't care what they think of me." Ronald's arms tightened around her, pulling her closer until she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against her chest. "You want to know a secret?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Half the people in this room are pretending to be something they're not. The other half are pretending they don't know it." His breath was warm against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "At least you're honest about the pretense. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to make you realize that you're already more authentic than anyone else here." He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes intense in the soft lighting. "Including me." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Around them, the party continued with its carefully orchestrated social warfare, but in their small bubble on the dance floor, something fundamental had shifted. "Ronald," she began, but he silenced her with a finger against her lips. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't say whatever you're about to say. Not here, not now. Just dance with me." So she did. She let herself get lost in the music, in the strength of his arms, in the dangerous fantasy that this beautiful, complicated man might actually be falling for his fake wife. It wasn't until much later, after the last guest had left and they were standing in the echoing silence of his penthouse, that the reality of their situation crashed back over her like a cold wave. "Separate bedrooms," she said quickly, backing away from him before the spell could fully take hold. That was the agreement. Ronald's expression shuddered, the vulnerable man from the dance floor disappearing behind his familiar mask of cold control. "Of course. Your room is the second door on the left. Mrs. Chen had your things moved in this afternoon." The formal distance in his voice hurt more than it should have. Ronald. Good night, Bella. He turned away from her, his shoulders rigid with tension. Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow we have brunch with my mother. Your mother? The words came out as a squeak. Ronald's smile was sharp and humorless. Did I forget to mention that? Catherine Blackwood makes Victoria Ashford look like a kindergarten teacher. Sleep well. As he disappeared into the depths of his penthouse palace, Bella stood alone in the living room that was larger than her childhood home, still wearing a dress that cost more than most people's yearly salary, and realized that tonight had been just the beginning. If she could barely survive one evening with his social circle, how on earth was she going to manage 3 months? More importantly, how was she going to manage the growing certainty that somewhere between his protective fury and his vulnerable honesty, she was falling for a man who had bought her like a commodity and could discard her just as easily? The contract had seemed so simple on paper. In reality, it was becoming the most complicated thing she'd ever done. So this is the little gold digger who's convinced my son that love conquers all. How absolutely precious. Catherine Blackwood's voice could have frozen champagne mid-pour. She sat in the private dining room of the plaza like a queen holding court, her silver hair styled in a perfect chignon that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Every inch of her screamed old money, from her understated pearl necklace to the way she held her teacup like it was a weapon of mass destruction. Bella felt Ronald's hand tighten imperceptibly on her thigh under the pristine white tablecloth. They'd been married exactly 72 hours, and she was already learning to read his micro-expressions like a survival manual. Mother, Ronald's voice carried a warning that would have made lesser mortals reconsider their life choices. I'd like you to meet my wife, Bella. Bella, my mother, Catherine Blackwood. Mrs. Blackwood. Bella extended her hand with as much grace as she could muster while wearing a designer dress that felt like borrowed armor. Ronald has told me so much about you. Catherine looked at the offered hand like it might be contaminated before giving it the briefest possible shake. How fascinating. He's told me absolutely nothing about you, which I suppose speaks volumes about the nature of this arrangement. The word arrangement hit like a physical blow. Bella felt heat crawl up her neck, but she'd be damned if she'd let this woman see her crumble on the first volley. Perhaps that's because our relationship is between us, Bella replied, with a smile that could have cut crystal. Not a board meeting requiring maternal approval. Ronald choked on his coffee. Catherine's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose to her hairline. The tension in the private dining room ratcheted up several degrees. How refreshingly direct, Catherine murmured. Tell me, dear, what exactly did you do before you trapped my son into this hasty marriage? I'm assuming it involved some form of service industry? The contempt in her voice was masterful, just subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability while landing with surgical precision. Bella felt the familiar burn of shame that came with being judged for circumstances beyond her control. I was a waitress, she said quietly, lifting her chin with dignity that had been earned through years of struggle, and a house cleaner, and I worked nights stocking shelves at a grocery store. 3 jobs to pay for my mother's cancer treatment and to keep a roof over our heads. How industrious. Catherine's smile was sharper than broken glass. Though I can't help but wonder what my son finds so compelling about someone whose greatest accomplishment is carrying plates without dropping them. Mother. Ronald's voice had dropped to that dangerous whisper that made smart people step backward. I'd suggest you reconsider your tone. Oh, I'm sorry, darling. Am I embarrassing your little project? Catherine's laugh was like wind chimes in a tornado. I'm simply trying to understand what could possibly have motivated you to marry a complete stranger when Vivian Ashford has been waiting in the wings for years. Bella's stomach dropped like a stone. Vivian Ashford? Victoria's daughter, Catherine continued with obvious relish. Beautiful, educated, from one of the finest families in Manhattan. She and Ronald have been close for quite some time, haven't you, darling? Ronald's jaw clenched so hard, Bella could hear his teeth grinding. Vivian and I were never serious. No? How strange. She seemed to think otherwise when she called me yesterday. absolutely devastated about your sudden elopement. Catherine's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. Apparently, she was under the impression that you two had an understanding. The words hit Bella like a series of physical blows. An understanding. Of course, there was another woman, probably several other women. Beautiful, sophisticated women who knew which fork to use and how to navigate conversations about trust funds and yacht clubs. Mother, that's enough. Ronald's voice cut through the air like a blade. Is it? Catherine leaned forward, her predatory smile widening. Because I think your little wife deserves to know exactly what she's walked into. This isn't a fairy tale, dear girl. This is business. Ronald needed a wife to satisfy the board's concerns about his stability, and you needed money for your dying mother. Very practical, very modern. But let's not pretend it's anything more romantic than a particularly lucrative employment contract. The clinical way she dissected their marriage made Bella feel sick. Every word was true, every accusation accurate, but hearing it laid out so coldly stripped away the fragile fantasy she'd been building over the past few days. You're right, Bella said quietly, surprising everyone at the table, including herself. It is a contract, a business arrangement. But here's what you don't understand, Mrs. Blackwood. I'm not ashamed of that. Catherine's smile faltered slightly. You want to judge me for being poor, for working 3 jobs, for doing whatever it took to save my mother's life. Bella's voice grew stronger with each word. Go ahead. But don't you dare pretend that your son is some innocent victim in this arrangement. He got exactly what he wanted. A temporary wife who won't cause him any inconvenience when this is over. Bella, Ronald started, but she cut him off. No, let me finish. She turned back to Catherine with fire in her dark eyes. You raised a son who thinks love is a commodity to be purchased, who believes that contracts are more reliable than emotions. Who's so terrified of genuine connection that he'd rather buy companionship than risk earning it honestly. So maybe before you judge me for accepting his offer, you should ask yourself what kind of man makes that offer in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine looked like she'd been slapped, and Ronald's face had gone completely white. Well, Catherine said finally, her voice shakier than before. You certainly have opinions. I have a backbone, Bella corrected. Something I earned by surviving in a world that didn't hand me anything on a silver platter. She stood gracefully, her designer dress feeling less like armor now and more like a costume she was tired of wearing. If you'll excuse me, I need some air. As she walked toward the exit with as much dignity as she could muster, she heard Catherine's voice behind her, quieter now, but still carrying that edge of cruelty. She's going to break your heart, you know. Girls like that always do. They take what they can get and disappear the moment something better comes along. Girls like what, exactly? Ronald's voice was arctic. Common girls, poor girls. Girls who have nothing to lose and everything to gain by lying about their feelings. Bella paused just outside the door, her hand on the handle, unable to move forward or backward. You're wrong, Ronald said quietly. She's the most honest person I've ever met. More honest than anyone in our family has been in generations. Honest about wanting your money, perhaps. Honest about everything else. There was something raw in Ronald's voice that made Bella's chest tighten. She's honest about her struggles, her fears, her pride. She's honest about not belonging in our world and not particularly wanting to. She's even honest about this being a business arrangement. More honest than I've been with myself. Whoa, what's that supposed to mean? Ronald was quiet for so long that Bella almost convinced herself he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his words hit her like lightning. It means that somewhere between signing that contract and watching her stand up to you just now, this stopped being business for me. Bella's knees went weak. She pressed her back against the wall outside the dining room, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure the entire plaza could hear it. Ronald, don't be ridiculous. I'm in love with her, Mother. God help me, I'm completely, irrevocably in love with my fake wife. The admission hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Bella couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she'd just heard. "That's impossible," Catherine sputtered. "You've known her less than a week. I've known her long enough to realize that everything I thought I wanted, the perfect society wife, the strategic marriage, the safe, emotionless arrangement, was just fear disguised as practicality." Bella closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten to spill over. He loved her. Ronald Blackwood, the ice king of Wall Street, the man who bought emotions like commodities, was in love with the girl from the wrong side of everything. "She'll leave you," Catherine said viciously. "The moment this contract is up, she'll take her money and disappear. You'll never see her again." "Probably," Ronald agreed quietly. "But that doesn't change how I feel." "Then you're a fool." "Maybe. But I'd rather be a fool in love than a coward hiding behind contracts and social expectations." Bella pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. She had to get out of here before she did something catastrophic like running back into that room and throwing herself into his arms. Because the terrible, wonderful, impossible truth was that somewhere between his protective fury and his vulnerable honesty, she'd fallen just as hard for him. And in exactly 87 days, their contract would expire, and she'd have to walk away from the only man who'd ever made her feel like she was worth fighting for. The irony was almost too perfect to bear. They were both in love with each other, and both convinced the other was only in it for the money. As she fled through the plaza's opulent lobby, Bella realized that Catherine Blackwood had been wrong about one thing. This wasn't going to end with her breaking Ronald's heart. It was going to end with both their hearts shattered beyond repair. "I should have known this was all just another one of your calculated business moves. Seduce the poor girl, make her fall in love with you, then discard her when someone more suitable comes along." Bella's voice cracked with fury and heartbreak as she stood in the marble foyer of Ronald's penthouse, her hands shaking as she clutched the morning edition of the New York Social Register. The headline blazed across the front page like a neon sign. "Blackwood, heirs temporary wife. Inside sources reveal 3-month contract marriage." Ronald froze in the doorway of his home office, his face going ashen as he took in the newspaper, Bella's tears, and the 3 suitcases lined up behind her like accusations. "Bella, let me explain." "Explain what?" She threw the paper at his feet, the pages scattering like confetti at a funeral. "Explain how every intimate moment we shared was being reported to gossip columnists. Explain how you've been feeding them information about our arrangement while I actually started believing this might be real." "That's not what happened." Ronald stepped toward her, his hands outstretched in supplication. "I would never, wouldn't you?" Bella's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "Because according to this very detailed article, you've been in constant communication with Vivian Ashford, reassuring her that our marriage is purely temporary and that you'll be available again once you've satisfied the board's requirements." Ronald's face went white. "Vivian called me. Once. I told her there was nothing between us." "You told her our marriage was fake." Bella's voice rose to near hysteria. "You told her I was just a contract employee playing a role. You told her that, quote, some people are born to be wives, others are born to be temporary conveniences." The quote hit like a physical blow. Ronald recoiled as if she'd slapped him. "I never said that. Bella, you have to believe me." "I don't have to believe anything anymore." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice grew steadier with each word. "I'm done being your convenient little wife. I'm done pretending this means something when clearly I'm just another business transaction to you." "You're not," Ronald's voice broke. "God, Bella, you're everything to me. You have to know that." "Do I?" She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, smearing her carefully applied makeup. "Because 3 days ago you told your mother you loved me, and now I find out you've been telling other people that I'm just a temporary employee with benefits." Ronald's world tilted. "You heard that conversation?" "Every word?" Bella's smile was bitter and broken. "Imagine my surprise, thinking for one beautiful, stupid moment that maybe you actually cared about me, only to discover that you've been shopping around for my replacement before the ink was even dry on our wedding certificate. Bella, please. Ronald reached for her, but she stepped back like his touch would burn. Don't. Her voice was quiet now, deadly calm. Don't touch me. Don't lie to me. And don't you dare try to convince me that this is anything other than what it's always been. A business arrangement that I was foolish enough to take personally. Ronald felt something crucial breaking inside his chest. If you had heard the entire conversation with my mother, you would know. I would know what? That you think I'm honest? That you think I'm authentic? Bella's laugh was hollow. Those aren't declarations of love, Ronald. Those are performance reviews. That's not... He ran his hands through his hair, desperation creeping into his voice. You're taking this all wrong. Yes, we started with a contract, but what we have now is a scandal. Bella gestured toward the newspaper. What we have now is my face plastered across the society pages with the headline, Gold Digger of the Month. What we have now is my mother calling me in tears because her friends at the hospital are asking if she raised a prostitute. The word hit Ronald like a punch to the gut. Jesus, Bella. No, you don't get to look shocked. Her voice turned venomous. You don't get to act surprised that people are calling me exactly what I knew they'd call me the moment I signed your contract. You knew this would happen. You knew they'd tear me apart the second they got bored with our little fairy tale. I tried to protect you. By feeding information to gossip columnists? By reassuring your ex-girlfriend that I'm just a temporary inconvenience? Bella shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. You didn't protect me, Ronald. You threw me to the wolves and then acted surprised when they started feeding. Ronald felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Everything was spiraling out of control, and he couldn't find the words to stop it. The article is wrong. I never spoke to any reporters. I never said those things about you. Then how do they know about the 3-month clause? How do they know about my mother's medical bills? How do they know that we sleep in separate bedrooms? Bella's voice rose with each question. How do they know intimate details that only you, me, and your lawyers knew? The questions hit like arrows finding their target. Ronald's mind raced, trying to piece together how their private information had been leaked. Someone in my office. Someone you trusted with details about your fake wife. Bella picked up the largest suitcase. Someone you confided in about your little social experiment. It's not an experiment. Ronald's composure finally cracked. Damn it, Bella, I love you! The words echoed in the marble foyer like gunshots. Bella froze, her hand on the suitcase handle, her entire body going rigid. No, she said quietly. You don't. Yes, I do. Ronald's voice was raw with desperation. I love the way you challenge everyone who tries to diminish you. I love the way you refuse to be intimidated by people who think money makes them better than you. I love the way you take care of your mother, and the way you light up when you talk about art history, and the way you look at me like I'm actually worth something. Bella turned around slowly, and the devastation on her face nearly brought him to his knees. You love the idea of me, she said softly. You love having someone authentic in your fake world. You love the novelty of someone who doesn't want your money. But you don't love me, Ronald. Because if you did, you never would have made our relationship into a business transaction in the first place. That's not fair. Fair? Bella's voice cracked. What's not fair is falling in love with someone who bought you like a commodity. What's not fair is believing that maybe, just maybe, you saw me as more than a convenient solution to your board of directors' concerns. What's not fair is having to read about my own marriage in the gossip pages like I'm some kind of celebrity scandal. She picked up her second suitcase, her movements mechanical and heartbreaking. The contract says I can terminate early if either party breaches confidentiality. Well, congratulations, Mr. Blackwood. Someone definitely breached confidentiality. Bella, wait! Ronald stepped toward her, panic clawing at his throat. Don't do this. Don't leave. We can fix this. How? She turned to face him one last time, and the pain in her eyes nearly destroyed him. How do we fix the fact that you never trusted me enough to make this real? How do we fix the fact that I fell in love with a man who sees relationships as contracts to be negotiated rather than connections to be cherished? I can fire everyone in my office. I can sue the newspaper. You can't fix the fact that this was never real for you. Bella's voice was barely above a whisper. It was always just a role you needed me to play until you could find someone better suited for the part. That's not true. Isn't it? She shouldered her purse, her movements efficient and final. Because when I leave here today, how long will it be before you call Vivian Ashford? How long before you find another wife who actually fits into your world without causing scandals and embarrassing your mother? Ronald felt something die inside his chest. I don't want anyone else. You don't want me either. Not really. You want the fantasy of me. The poor girl who makes you feel noble and authentic. Bella moved toward the door, each step taking her further away from him. But you don't want the reality of being with someone your entire social circle sees as beneath you. You don't want the complications and the gossip and the constant need to defend your choices. Bella, goodbye, Ronald. She paused at the door without turning around. The lawyer will be in touch about the financial arrangements. I'm keeping the money. Not because I'm a gold digger, but because my mother's life is more important than my pride. Please don't go. I have to. Her voice broke on the last word. Because if I stay any longer, I might actually believe you when you say you love me. And that would destroy us both. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of the world. Ronald stood alone in his marble palace, surrounded by all the wealth and power that had once seemed so important, and realized that none of it meant anything without the woman who had just walked out of his life. For the first time in his adult life, he had no idea how to fix what he'd broken. And for the first time in his adult life, he wasn't sure it could be fixed at all. Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, firing your entire legal team, liquidating half your assets, and publicly denouncing your own mother in the New York Times is not what most people would consider rational behavior. Marcus Chen, Ronald's longtime attorney and closest friend, sat across from him in the penthouse that had felt like a mausoleum for the past 2 weeks. The space that had once been filled with Bella's laughter now echoed with nothing but Ronald's footsteps and the sound of his world systematically falling apart. Rationale went out the window the moment I let her walk out that door, Ronald muttered, not looking up from the stack of legal documents spread across his dining table. I've spent 14 days tracking down every source, every leak, every person who contributed to destroying her reputation. And do you know what I found? Marcus adjusted his glasses nervously. I'm afraid to ask. My own assistant, Patricia Hamilton. 23 years of loyal service, and she sold every detail of my personal life to Harrison Montgomery for $50,000 and a promise of employment with his firm. Ronald's voice was eerily calm, which Marcus knew from experience was far more dangerous than shouting. Harrison wanted to destroy my marriage to prove I was unstable. Mission accomplished. Ronald, you can't blame yourself for... Can't I? Ronald finally looked up, and Marcus was shocked by the devastation in his friend's eyes. I brought her into this world. I exposed her to these people. I made her a target because I was too much of a coward to admit that I needed her more than she needed me. So what's your plan? Because liquidating your portfolio to anonymously pay off medical debt for every cancer patient in New York seems a bit extreme. Ronald smiled for the first time in 2 weeks, though it didn't reach his eyes. That's not the extreme part. And before Marcus could ask what he meant, Ronald's phone buzzed with a text that made his expression soften in a way Marcus had never seen before. She got into Columbia, Ronald said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Graduate program in art history, full scholarship. She starts in the fall. That's wonderful, but how do you... I've been having her watched, not stalked, Ronald added quickly at Marcus's expression. Protected. The media circus hasn't entirely died down, and I needed to make sure she was safe. Marcus studied his friend's face. And? And she's working double shifts at a diner in Queens to pay for her mother's continued treatment. She's living in a studio apartment that's smaller than my walk-in closet. She takes the subway to Columbia twice a week for orientation meetings, and every single time she lights up like she's been given the greatest gift in the world. You could just call her. Ronald's laugh was bitter. And say what? Sorry I destroyed your life, but I liquidated half my fortune and ruined several careers in revenge. So we're even now. She was right about everything, Marcus. I did treat our relationship like a business transaction. I did fail to protect her. I did let my world tear her apart. So you're just going to let her go? I'm going to give her what she actually wants, Ronald said quietly. A life free from scandal, enough money to pursue her dreams, and the chance to find someone who deserves her. Marcus shook his head. You're an idiot. Excuse me? You heard me. You're an idiot if you think that woman doesn't love you just as much as you love her. Marcus leaned forward, his voice growing urgent. Do you want to know what my investigator really found when you had him protecting her? Ronald's jaw tightened. What? She hasn't touched a penny of the settlement money. It's sitting in the account you set up, completely untouched. She's struggling to pay rent and medical bills, but she won't use your money. The words hit Ronald like a physical blow. That's impossible. The contract clearly states... The contract states she gets the money. It doesn't say she has to spend it. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Ronald a series of photographs. These are from last week. She's working at Mel's Diner in Queens, pulling double shifts to cover her mother's new treatment protocol. Ronald stared at the photos of Bella in a yellow uniform, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, serving coffee to truckers and construction workers. She looked exhausted but determined, and even in the grainy surveillance photos, her inner strength shone through. Why won't she take the money? Ronald's voice was barely above a whisper. Because she meant what she said about not being a gold digger. Because her pride is worth more to her than financial security. Because she'd rather struggle with dignity than live comfortably on money that came from a relationship that broke her heart. Ronald felt something crack open in his chest. God, what have I done? You've acted like every other rich asshole who thinks money solves everything, Marcus said bluntly. But it's not too late to fix this. How? She won't see me. She won't take my calls. She returned every gift I sent with a note that just said, "Return to sender." Marcus smiled. Then stop trying to buy your way back into her life and start earning it. What's that supposed to mean? It means you need to prove that you see her as more than a business transaction. You need to show her that you're willing to be vulnerable, to take risks, to put yourself on the line for her the way she did for you. Ronald was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing. I have an idea. Please tell me it doesn't involve more public spectacles or financial grand gestures. Actually, it involves the opposite. Ronald stood up, suddenly energized for the first time in weeks. Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the month. I need to learn how to be worthy of her. What does that mean? Ronald's smile was genuine for the first time since Bela had walked out. It means I'm going to become the man she deserves, not the man I've always been. 3 weeks later, Bella was rushing between tables at Mel's Diner when she nearly dropped a full pot of coffee at the sight of the man sitting in booth 7. Ronald Blackwood, former heir to the Blackwood Empire, sat in her section wearing jeans and a simple black t-shirt that made him look younger and somehow more real than she'd ever seen him. His usually perfect hair was slightly mussed, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and genuine suffering. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Ordering coffee," he said simply, "and maybe some pie, if you have any recommendations." "Ronald. Actually, it's Ron now. I had my name legally changed." He gestured to the newspaper folded beside him. "You might have seen the announcement. Right next to the article about me resigning from the board of Blackwood Industries." Bella's hands shook as she poured his coffee. "You did what?" "I quit. Liquidated my trust fund. Donated most of it to cancer research in your mother's name. His gray eyes held hers steadily. Turns out I don't actually want to be a billionaire if it means being the kind of person who treats love like a corporate acquisition. You're insane, she whispered. Probably. I've also been volunteering at a free clinic in the Bronx, teaching financial literacy to single mothers. Apparently, I have some useful skills that don't involve destroying people's lives. Bella felt tears prick at her eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because I needed you to know that I heard you. Every word you said to me was true. I did treat our relationship like a business transaction. I did fail to protect you. I did let my pride and fear keep me from being honest about how I felt. Ron, he corrected gently, and I'm not here to ask for another chance. I'm here to tell you that you were right about everything, and I'm sorry. The simple honesty in his voice nearly undid her. You don't understand. I understand that you won't take the settlement money because you'd rather struggle with dignity than be comfortable with guilt. I understand that you're working yourself to exhaustion because you refuse to let anyone question your integrity. I understand that I hurt you so badly that you'd rather punish yourself than accept help from someone who claimed to love you. Bella set the coffee pot down with trembling hands. Stop. I love you, Bella. Not the idea of you, not the fantasy of authenticity you represented in my sterile world. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and your refusal to compromise your values even when it would make your life easier. I love the way you challenge me to be better than I am. I love that you see through all my defenses and call me on my bullshit. Please don't do this, she whispered, tears spilling over despite her best efforts. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm asking you to let me prove that I'm capable of being the man you thought I could be. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple white envelope. This is a job offer. Bella stared at the envelope like it might explode. A what? The Metropolitan Museum is looking for a new assistant curator for their medieval collection. The pay is modest, the hours are long, and the work is challenging. It has nothing to do with me. I don't even know anyone on their hiring committee. How did you? I spent 3 weeks learning everything I could about art history and museum curation. I wanted to understand the world you're passionate about, not because I thought it would impress you, but because I wanted to know what makes you light up the way you do when you talk about Byzantine mosaics. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her hands. Ron, and this isn't about winning you back. This is about giving you the life you actually want, regardless of whether I'm in it. He stood up, leaving money on the table that was exactly the cost of the coffee, no more. You deserve to spend your days surrounded by beautiful things that tell stories about people who lived and loved and dreamed centuries ago. You deserve to matter. As he moved toward the door, Bella found her voice. Why should I believe this is real and not just another elaborate gesture designed to get what you want? Ron turned back, and the vulnerability in his eyes took her breath away. Because I'm not asking for anything in return. Because I've spent the last month learning how to be someone worthy of your respect, not someone trying to buy your affection. Because the only thing I want is for you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me. And if I take the job, then I'll know you're pursuing your dreams, and that will be enough. And if I don't? Ron's smile was sad but genuine. Then I'll know you're making your own choices for your own reasons, and that will be enough too. He walked out of the diner without looking back, leaving Bella standing in booth 7 with a job offer that could change her life, and the growing realization that the man she'd fallen in love with might finally be becoming the man she'd always hoped he could be. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could conquer all, even when all seemed lost. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Metropolitan Museum's newest assistant curator, Dr. Bella Santos, who will be delivering tonight's lecture on Love Letters in Stone, Romance and Devotion in Medieval Art. The applause that filled the museum's grand lecture hall was thunderous. but Bella barely heard it over the hammering of her heart. 6 months had passed since that life-changing morning at Mel's diner, and her new life felt like the most beautiful dream she'd ever dared to have. She'd taken the job, not because of Ron, though his gesture had shown her that maybe, just maybe, people could change, but because it was everything she'd ever wanted. The work was challenging. The colleagues respected her expertise, and every day she woke up excited to spend her time surrounded by centuries of human creativity and passion. As she stepped up to the podium in her simple black dress, purchased with her own salary, earned through her own merit, she caught sight of a familiar figure in the back row. Her breath caught in her throat. Ron sat in the very last seat, wearing a navy blazer that made his gray eyes look like storm clouds. He'd kept his promise. No contact, no pressure, no attempts to insert himself into her new life. But he was here, and the pride shining in his face made her chest tight with emotion. "Thank you," she began, her voice growing stronger as she found her rhythm. "Tonight, I want to talk about something that transcends time, culture, and social status. The universal human need to leave evidence that we were here, that we loved, and that we were loved in return." She clicked to her first slide, a carved stone relief from the 12th century showing a knight kneeling before his lady. This piece was commissioned by a man named Geoffrey de Clare for his wife, Eleanor. Geoffrey was a minor lord, not particularly wealthy or powerful. But he spent 3 years' income on this carving because he wanted the world to know that Eleanor was worth every sacrifice. Her eyes found Ron's across the crowded room. He was listening with the intensity of someone memorizing every word. What makes this piece extraordinary isn't its artistic merit, though it's beautiful, but its emotional authenticity. Geoffrey didn't commission it to impress his peers or advance his social standing. He created it because he was so full of love that he had to find a way to make it permanent. Click. The next slide showed a Byzantine mosaic of 2 figures with their hands intertwined. "Love has always been the great equalizer," Bella continued, her voice growing more passionate. "It doesn't care about your bank account or your pedigree. It doesn't ask for references or require a contract. It simply demands that you be brave enough to risk everything for something that might break your heart." In the back row, Ron's hands clenched in his lap. Every word felt like it was meant for him, like she was speaking directly to the hope he'd been carefully tending for 6 months. "But here's what I've learned in my research," Bella said, clicking to a new image. A simple gold ring with an inscription worn almost smooth by time. "The greatest love stories aren't the ones where everything goes perfectly. They're the ones where people mess up, hurt each other, make terrible mistakes, and then find the courage to fight for something worth saving." The audience was completely captivated, but Bella only had eyes for the man in the back row who was sitting forward now, his entire body tense with attention. This ring belonged to a woman named Margaret of Wessex. Her husband William was, let's call him, problematic. He was arrogant, controlling, and initially married her for political reasons. But somewhere along the way, he fell in love with her strength, her intelligence, her refusal to be diminished by his world. Bella's voice grew softer, more intimate. When their marriage fell apart due to his mistakes and pride, William didn't just send gifts or write poetry. He spent 2 years learning to be worthy of her. He gave up his titles, donated his lands to the poor, and dedicated his life to becoming the man she'd believed he could be. Ron's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Several people in the audience were glancing between Bella and the mysterious man in the back row, sensing undercurrents they couldn't quite identify. The inscription on Margaret's ring, worn smooth by decades of her touch, reads, "Not because I must, but because I choose." Bella's voice broke slightly. That's what real love is. Not obligation or contract or social expectation. It's choice. Every single day, choosing to see the best in someone, choosing to forgive their mistakes, choosing to believe in their capacity for growth. She clicked to her final slide, a photo of herself standing in front of the very Byzantine mosaic that had inspired her to pursue art history in the first place. 6 months ago, I thought I knew what I wanted from life. Security, independence, the ability to pursue my dreams without depending on anyone else. She paused, her eyes locked with Ron's. But I've learned something important while studying these medieval love stories. The most profound human experiences, love, art, faith, hope, require vulnerability. They require us to take risks that might end in heartbreak. The room was silent, except for the soft sound of someone in the back row rising from their seat. They require us to choose courage over safety, authenticity over perfection, and love over fear. Bela's voice grew stronger as Ron began walking slowly down the aisle toward the podium. Because the alternative, living safely behind walls of pride and self-protection, isn't really living at all. Gasps and whispers rippled through the audience as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Ron reached the front of the room but didn't step onto the stage. Instead, he looked up at Bela with all the vulnerability and love he'd spent months learning to feel, without shame. "Dr. Santos," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed auditorium. "I have a question about your research." Bela's smile was radiant and trembling. "Yes, Mr. Smith, Ron Smith." The audience chuckled at the obvious pseudonym. "You mentioned that William gave up his titles and lands to prove his love for Margaret. But what convinced her to give him a second chance? What made her believe his transformation was real?" Bela stepped closer to the edge of the stage, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. According to the historical records, it wasn't any grand gesture or expensive gift. It was the fact that he kept his promises even when she wasn't watching. He continued his charitable work, continued living humbly, continued being the man she'd inspired him to become, even when he had no guarantee she'd ever forgive him. And did she? Forgive him? Eventually. Bela's voice was barely above a whisper. When she realized that he wasn't trying to win her back, he was simply trying to become worthy of her memory. When she understood that his love for her had changed him permanently, not temporarily. Ron nodded slowly. "One more question, if I may." "Of course. If someone like William, someone who had hurt the woman he loved through his own pride and mistakes, if someone like that had truly changed, truly become the man she'd always believed he could be, and if he loved her enough to spend the rest of his life proving it, do you think Margaret would consider giving him another chance?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. The entire auditorium held its breath. Bela looked down at this man who had given up everything to become worthy of her love, who had kept every promise even when she wasn't there to witness it, who had loved her enough to let her go and patient enough to wait for her to find her way back to him. "I think," she said softly, stepping down from the stage until she was standing directly in front of him, "that Margaret would tell William that she never stopped loving him. She was just waiting for him to love himself enough to believe he deserved her." Ron's hand shook as he reached up to cup her face. "And if William told Margaret that every day for the past 6 months, he's woken up grateful that she inspired him to become a better man, even if she never spoke to him again, I think Margaret would say that she's tired of being inspired by medieval love stories when she could be living one of her own." And if William asked Margaret to marry him again, not because of a contract or social expectations or business arrangements, but simply because he can't imagine spending another day of his life without her? Bela's smile was brighter than all the museum's spotlights combined. "I think Margaret would say yes, but only if William promises that this time it's not temporary. This time it's forever." "Forever," Ron repeated solemnly, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket, nothing like the ostentatious engagement ring from their first fake courtship. This one was inscribed with words that made Bela's heart stop. "Not because I must, but because I choose." As he slipped it onto her finger and kissed her with 6 months' worth of patient love and carefully earned trust, the entire lecture hall erupted in applause and cheers. But Bela barely heard them over the sound of her own heart finally coming home. "I love you, Ron Smith," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too, Dr. Bela Santos. and I choose you. Every day for the rest of my life, I choose you." In the back of the room, Harrison Montgomery stormed out in disgust, muttering about inappropriate public displays and the decline of social standards. Catherine Blackwood followed him, her face a mask of aristocratic disapproval. But Victoria Ashford, who had snuck in to witness what she'd expected to be Ronald's public humiliation, found herself wiping away tears as she watched two people who had found something she'd never experienced. Love that transformed rather than possessed, love that inspired rather than demanded, love that chose courage over safety and authenticity over perfection. As Ron and Bella held each other in the golden glow of the museum's lights, surrounded by centuries of human artistry and creativity, they knew they were creating their own masterpiece, not carved in stone or captured in mosaic, but written in the choice to love each other completely, imperfectly, and eternally. The contract had brought them together. But love, real, chosen, fearless love, would keep them together forever. And in a world that often forgot the difference between price and value, between transaction and connection, between possession and partnership, Ron and Bella had become living proof that the best things in life could never be bought. They could only be earned, cherished, and chosen every single day. The end.